I just always was a little bit of a fantasist. Storytelling was such a natural love of mine. I don't think I ever would have considered pursuing it as a job because I felt like I couldn't make money doing it.
International bestselling author, producer, writer, director.
Please welcome Soman Chainani.
You're the executive producer on the movie, which shot to #1 on Netflix worldwide most watch list right after its premiere.
I spent 4 years building the resume to get hired by Disney. The spring of my senior year, when I went to interview for Disney, I'm like, I am getting this job. I did all the right things. You're so used to being in school and climbing the ladder a certain way because the teachers tell you this. When you don't get that job, oh wait, what the world tells me I have to do in order to get to where I want to get is not necessarily true. You don't know what your life's going to be necessarily. You might think you know, but if you try too hard to control it in a certain direction, it might fight back against you.
Hello there, and welcome to another episode of Unlock Your Potential. Jeff Lerner, your host. Always so excited to be back with you, having incredible conversations with incredible human beings. Today, we're joined by yet another one, Soman Chainani. He is a writer and filmmaker. His debut book series, The School for Good and Evil, has sold over 4 million copies, been translated into 35 languages across 6 continents, which I presume means all of them minus Antarctica. And it has been adapted into a major motion picture from Netflix that debuted at #1 in over 80 countries. I have to say, I have not seen the movie, but I have seen the movie in my recommended Netflix movies list. So that's pretty cool. I want to say, oh man, who was in it? I feel like I remember Larry Fishburne was in it, and Charlize Theron. Charlize Theron. Yeah. That's incredible. Okay.
It was quite the cast. Kerry Washington, Paul Feig directing. It was a very sort of starry experience.
Wow. Yeah, that's incredible. Not your only book. You've got a book of retold fairy tales, Beasts and Beauty, that also debuted on the New York Times bestseller list. I see here that was your 7th consecutive book to be on the New York Times bestseller list, and is actually in development for a TV run with Sony. My goodness, it's quite a bio because you're just quite accomplished. Graduate of Harvard and Columbia's MFA film program, nominated for a bunch of prizes as a writer. And it looks like you've spent a lot of time in schools. Interested to hear about that. And honestly, I'm just grateful you're on the show, man. Let's get into it.
Well, thanks for having me.
Maybe let's start with where do you think this interest, I don't even know if interest is the right word, that what are the seeds of this creative talent and how did they get watered early in your life?
I think it's a little bit like athletic talent or musical talent or any kind of artistic talent where it's in you. It's just sort of a gift you have. And then it's the question of whether you have the resources and environment to bring it out of you, you know? And I think in my case, I just always was a little bit of a fantasist. I always kind of lived in my head and had stories. The storytelling was such a natural love of mine, whatever version that would take. And I just think my parents encouraged it, and they were big on letting me go to writing camps and, doing weird projects and entering contests and things like that. So it was never looked down upon, but instead, was always encouraged, and because of that, I always saw it as a completely natural part of my personality and things like that. I don't think I ever would have considered pursuing it as a job because I felt like you couldn't make money doing it. And it was only once I went down the business route of trying to be in business and all of that and failing at that spectacularly, that I suddenly realized, okay, well, let's try the creative thing because that's probably the only thing I'm good at.
Okay. Wow. Well, the massive business failure or the spectacular business failure was not in your bio for obvious reasons.
Yeah.
I'm so grateful you brought it up because I very much want to talk about it. Can you tell me about that foray?
Oh yeah. I mean, out of Harvard, I really wanted a job at Disney. That was my dream in life, was to work for them. And I had spent all my summers building the skills to get hired by Disney. All my internships were in advertising and PR and entertainment and all facets of that field, working for the Jim Henson Company, working for a brand optimization group that specialized in entertainment. And so, the spring of my senior year, when I went to interview for Disney, I'm like, I am getting this job. I did all the right things. And I didn't get it for a number of reasons. And then ended up taking a last minute job in management consulting without any experience in the field or, anything like that. And so I started working for them in the fall of 2001. I think it was late August, early September. And very much did not want to be there because I was still dreaming of that Disney job or working in entertainment or something adjacent to storytelling. And they knew I didn't want to be there. And they sort of put me on this terrible project that involved me writing for a website that they had. I basically was like the English major that they hired to write the copy for their website. They purposely left me off the recruiting team. 11 out of 12 of the first years were on the recruiting team. And I was the only one who was not. So it just was a depressing experience, but I felt like I didn't know where else to turn or where to go. And I started writing my book in the corner, like my screenplays and my book in the corner. And that's what I was sort of do all day, pretending to be writing for their website. And they eventually caught on and fired me. So that was kind of my experience in the consulting field. It was, I was just kind of sad to be there. And luckily was ushered out quite quickly.
That's awesome. I worked one part of one summer in high school in the office supply room of a big law firm. And it was kind of a similar experience. I mean, the stakes maybe weren't as high because at 16 I wasn't, or 15, whatever I wasn't expected to like support myself and be a grown up.
Yeah.
It was my summer thing, and it was just enough to go, I never, ever, 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 ever want my adult life to look like this at any point. I would literally rather live under a bridge. And within 6 months, I dropped out of high school to become a jazz musician. So there you go.
Well, that's it. I think you just need that experience. I think you also need the experience of not getting what you wanted. Like I spent 4 years building the resume for a job in, Disney. I think it was entertainment strategy was the division. So I worked on every side of that, and then when you don't get it, you think you're so used to being in school and climbing the ladder a certain way because the teachers tell you this, and it's so prescriptive. So when you don't get that job, that's, I think, even the more important moment, because it was this scramble moment of, oh, wait, what the world tells me I have to do in order to get to where I want to get is not necessarily true, And so I almost took that consulting job out of this sort of desperate desire to fit in with what the model of success was, right? Because what else was I going to do? There were no real options. I mean, maybe go to grad school, but at that point I'd been in school for so long that didn't make much sense. I had to prove I could get a job. So, what I tell kids sometimes is you don't know what your life's going to be necessarily. You might think you know, but if you try too hard to control it in a certain direction, it might fight back against you.
So what a blessing to be dispelled of the notion that this, linear prescriptive approach to life is a fallacy at an age where you were still so young and had so much time to make different choices ahead of you. In my work, I run a what we call a life design community. It's a platform of people that are trying to make changes in their life, very often mid to late stream. I mean, I think our average student avatar is probably close to 50. Many are older, and they're just sort of having a lot of times this epiphany to go, man, I did everything I was supposed to do for decades.
Yeah.
And it's not panning out the way they told me it would.
Yeah.
So what a gift for you.
Yeah, I was looking to have it early. And creatively, I think you go through the same ups and downs, right? Which is like sometimes the final product doesn't look the way you want it to. Other times it does. And so I think for me, I like writing books because it's the closest I can usually get to executing on exactly the vision in my head. You know, with every single novel I've put out, it's exactly what I conceived it to be. And so I have no regrets about any of them. It's usually when you have to collaborate that sometimes you can run into a little bit of trouble. You know, I think it's a little bit more hit and miss, but I think that's a skill you learn just by doing it over and over again.
So talk to me about, I want to hear about the period of time from being a failed management consultant to a successful, recognized writer. Talk to me about that time interval.
Yeah, I was on unemployment for a year, which actually was great because I had enough, not really enough, but some saved up from consulting, because I think they gave 1 or 2 months, enough to sort of stretch it out and spend time just thinking, okay, like, how did I get here? What do I actually want to do? And I remember just going on a lot of walks in Manhattan. And that's kind of what I would do all day, is just sort of walk around and be like, for the first time, I was trying to like open my eyes to the world, not being this kind of, prescriptive thing that anything could happen. I would just go to weird shows and go look at sites in the city I'd never seen before. I just was pushing myself to go have new experiences without the structure of a workday. Because I think I was just a little too type A and I needed the kind of change. And I think after about a year, I finally had this realization of what I always wanted to do was work in the field of storytelling. And I didn't know what that was going to be. And so I decided to go to film school. There was something about going to film school that seemed like the right thing. And so I went to film school at Columbia in New York City. And that's where everything kind of began. And because I came in not as a dilettante, but somebody very determined to make a career out of it, I think I came out with a lot more momentum than other students and was being hired right away. And that ultimately led to me making the relationships that when it came time to do the School for Good and Evil, I was going to do it as a movie, write it as a movie. And I had a producer say, this really feels more like a novel. Why don't you write the proposal for it? And I'll send it out to some publishers and we'll see what they say. And that's how it all started.
So you did not have, or I shouldn't assume, what was the time interval between graduating from Columbia's master's in film program to kind of securing your first gainful, I don't know if you call it gainful employment, but whatever, that moment when you're like, okay, this is going to be a viable thing. I've got some traction here.
Probably about 6 months. So, it was pretty quick.
So yeah, that is, I mean, that's quite, I don't know I know the literature world somewhat. I have a friend that was a poet and he's actually a literature professor. And through him, I've gotten to experience vicariously some of that life. I think I experienced it more on the musical side as a jazz musician, to just see like how long that grind can extend for some people. And sometimes it never ends. It ends at their funeral, but
yeah, but also in my case, I was getting hired and was not particularly thrilled with the outcome, because you're working on these projects, but you're working on them for studios and they come in with so many notes and so many politics. And I worked on one movie for almost a year and a half, and the director was fired, and the executive was fired, and the notes kept changing. And so at some point I just was like, I would like to be able to control my destiny. And that's, I think, slowly by little, the world sort of tilted me towards books.
Okay. So then let's talk about that. Because that I think I can really relate to. You've got a creative impulse that wants to express and expand, but in order to get paid to do it, you have to accept all these constraints that make it feel I don't want to speak for you, but I know for me, when it was like, oh, I'm a jazz musician, but I'm having to play yet another wedding where they're, it's like the oeuvre of Elton John for the 800th time. It's like, I want to be an artist, but instead I feel like a robot. Talk to me about that that for you and how you sort of kept your creative flame from going out during that time?
I think I just couldn't put up with the notes, you know? And I just think I'm very transparent in terms of how I'm feeling. Like, I don't have a good poker face. I'm not a particularly clever or, long-term planner in terms of how to play these games, you know? And so when I just didn't agree with the notes, I just would be like, I don't know how to do these. Like, I didn't work well in that system. And it was very clear that I couldn't do it. I think you have to be a certain kind of writer who doesn't particularly care so much about the outcome, but really just wants to have steady employment in Hollywood in order to survive that system, because you have to just take the notes and do it. And that's how you become known as a studio friendly writer. And I just was not that. So I think it just, the frustrations on my side, and I'm sure the frustrations on theirs, just made it clear that it was time to move on, you know?
So you exited that system and then did what from there?
And I started working with the producer on turning my idea for School for Evil into a proposal for a book series. So I wrote chapters, I sort of outlined the whole thing. And then she was able, as kind of the agent on it, to secure the book deal for it. And then from there, I never kind of looked back. I think it was 10 years on that one series, and I just loved every part of it because I felt like I was in control of everything, from the writing to the marketing to the way I put it out. It felt like I was almost directing. I always wanted to direct movies, and it felt like I got to do that in my own way because I was running almost like a full-scale business, because School for Good and Evil became like a real, what's the word? Kind of worldwide story. It went all over the place. Everyone was reading it. It was in so many countries and things. I got to travel. I got to meet readers all over the place. It just felt like a great vehicle to not just creatively flourish, but also to have a cool experience with meeting readers and being out there in the world.
I mean, first of all, I just want to say congratulations. It's not a lot of artists who get to sort of have the best of both worlds, where it's like pure and true to their creative vision and also prosperous and popular and successful.
I think it's a combination of a lot of things, but I think one of them is in publishing. If you just write whatever your specific vision is, without worrying about the market and without worrying about anything like that, sometimes when it hits, I think it can be almost more fulfilling, because School for Good and Evil was so strange for the time. Like, there were no other books like it. It looks like Harry Potter on the surface, maybe, but the book itself is very, very different. I wasn't really compared to Potter once people read it. In fact, no one could really find a comparison for it. And I think that's why it was so successful, because I hadn't read a lot of kids' books. I didn't even think I was writing a kid's book. I thought I was writing it for adults. So it ended up just being something very new. And I think that's important that I tell artists, is that don't worry about the market so much. Worry about what makes you unique as a artist, like, what is it you're bringing that no one's seen before? Every book I write, I'm trying to invent a genre that doesn't exist. And if I can do that, then I feel like I've done my job. I want it so that when the editor gets it or when a reader picks it up, they're like, they don't know how to compare it because it's too different.
So I'll say right now, for your benefit, the audience, already is self-aware, so to speak. A large part of the audience of this show are either current or aspiring entrepreneurs. Because so much of the audience from this show comes from my life design platform, Entre, which, as a practical matter of most people reinventing their lives, it's like the starting point is usually, well, I got to change the way I make money or else I don't have as many options. And so we connect them with entrepreneurship. And so I'm hoping that everybody and the audience knows that I credit a lot of my entrepreneurial success to my career as a jazz musician, which is which is so aligned with what you're describing, where as a jazz musician, it's very different from being a classical musician in the sense of perfect recreation of someone else's vision. In jazz, it's all about uniquely creating your own voice in a moment, in real time, never to occur again, right? It's finding your voice. And I always say that as an entrepreneur, it's so much like a jazz improvisation, and probably so much like a writing exercise, where you're trying to spin out this thing that it has connective tissue. Like it's all thematic and it's all connected, but it's novel and it's interesting and it's indelibly you in the creation. And so much of entrepreneurial theory is, I think, really, really reductive and fear-based. And I have to imagine that this is true in writing too, where it's like, oh, well, if you want to be successful, it needs to be more like James Patterson. It needs to be more like Stephen King. Now, I don't know who you are. I don't care who you are. You're an unknown. I don't need it to be more like you. I need it to be more like them. And I think that's garbage advice, but it's the easy advice for us to glom onto as humans, because we're scared and we want proof already in the market that what we're doing is going to work too.
Yeah. And I think what's interesting is when I have found success, it's by doing something very contrarian and very different to the market. In it was School for Good and Evil, I was lucky because at the time, books for young readers, like my age range was like 9 to 13. The market said no romance for them, that it was to be, they wanted action and adventure, they wanted Harry Potter. And I wrote basically a melodrama, a soap opera romance for tweens, and 16 of 17 publishers. Normally you get different feedback from publishers. Everyone's subjective, and you have to sort of reconcile all the notes. This time 16 of 17 came back with the same no, which was like, this will never fly, because parents and librarians and gatekeepers will totally reject the romance in this. And I was like, I don't know why.
Can I ask, is that just because they're saying it's age inappropriate?
Yeah, they're saying it's age inappropriate, Okay. And I'm like, it's a fairy tale world. When we go to watch The Little Mermaid, Beauty and the Beast, all the kids are going, it is a romance. That's what we're watching. So what is the problem, And so what I did was I just took the ages out of the characters, because previously they were 15, 16 in the book. And they were like 9, that was the other thing. 9 to 12-year-olds don't want to read about 15 to 16-year-olds. I'm like, Ariel is 16 years old in Disney, and everyone in them going to see that movie is like 9 years old. So I was like, I don't know what world you're living in, but every tween, especially tween girls, their lives are consumed with romance. And even if they don't even understand what romance is, that's why they love Taylor Swift, right? So one publisher was like, we'll give you a small advance and we'll take a bet on it. And it just became this phenomenon because girls started reading it and passing it to their friends. So it became the book for especially young girls, And then the boys started reading it because they were like, why are all these girls reading this? I better figure out what's going on. And so but I think I was lucky there. And now that I'm an experienced writer, I can go whenever I pitch a new book, I can be bold in pursuing a new direction because I have a track record. I think when you're new, that's when it's hard. I think I've pitched many books that wouldn't have gotten through if I was a new writer, because they would have been like, I just was lucky that out of 17, one just threw caution to the wind and thought, let's try an experiment.
Yeah, but how many times did J.K. Rowling get rejected with Harry Potter? It's a legend. It's like 50 times or something, right?
Well, I think the key is, so I've seen what happens with other people. Like if you send out your work and you're just getting a lot of rejections, but the rejections are different, the notes are different, that's always a sign that there's something wrong. Because if you're getting like 10 rejections and everyone has a different thing, there's something wrong in the DNA of it. If everyone comes back with one piece of feedback, like in my case, everyone was saying the same thing, that's when you have to be like, okay, they're all saying the same thing. Now, are they right? In which case I have to change it, or are they wrong? In which case I have to find a way to do this myself because I'm ahead, I think that was an important thing. And I think in my case, because I was 27 and stupid and very stubborn. So I just kept scratching my head being like, I don't understand. You're telling me 10-year-old girls don't want to read a romance? And they were like, yes. And I was like, that's not what's happening. So like, I think because I just kept being like, but what you're saying does not make sense. And I didn't have the fear of it not being published or whatever. I just was it was the same instinct I have when people gave me bad notes, to be like, this does not make sense, to just fight the logic of it. I think is what ultimately, got me to push it through.
So the idea that's coming to mind right now is the George Bernard Shaw quote that the reasonable man adapts himself to the world. The unreasonable man persists in trying to adapt the world to himself. Therefore, all progress depends on the unreasonable man. I tell our students all the time, be unreasonable. But the only basis for being unreasonable versus insane is to know thyself well enough to know that you're being unreasonable on the pedestal of your own convictions.
Well, also, I think on that note, it's important. I mean, I had the evidence of what I was seeing out in the world, my niece and nephew and all that stuff, but also myself. So when I asked one publisher when they said, there's no romance for doing, I said, when I was 11 and 12, I was done with kids' books and just started reading Anne Rice. I was reading Interview with the Vampire and things like that because it was so wonderful and intense. And a lot of kids I knew at that age had already moved to adult books. So I was like, and those books are filled with romance. So what does an 11 and 12-year-old read now? And they were giving me the examples of these really babyish books. But I'm like, I don't know what they read, because I didn't read that. So I knew from experience, like what an 11 and 12-year-old, and also my nephew, my nephew was, when he turned 11 or 12, he's such a good reader. He was like, what do I read? So he didn't want to read like Twilight, these sort of like, kind of more young adult books, but he was just kind of in that in-between phase, So then he would start sneaking Stephen King and all this other stuff. And I'm like, there's no books for those really sophisticated, smart kids, And so I saw an open lane. But that also came from my own experience, not just looking at the market. So I think the combination of knowing yourself plus the market ends up helping.
Hey there, it's Jeff. So real quick, I want to let you know about my text message community. I use text messages to provide unique value to the Unlock Your Potential community. These texts could just be random thoughts. It could be letting you be the first to know about an event I'm planning, maybe giving an update on a special I'm running or some free training that I host for my community. Anyway, just shoot me a text to get subscribed to the list. The number is 702-996-3926. Again, that is 702-996-3926. Let's get back to the podcast.
Yeah, I think there's a character distinction between knowing yourself and trust, or knowing your own experience and trusting your own experience. Mm-hmm. Because where I see, and I know I'm cognizant of the time. I know I committed to you to have you out in time for your next appointment, and we'll get there. But I just want to declare, I mean, from my vantage point of seeing so many people coming in, again, at later stages in life, trying to pivot, trying to transform, ultimately trying to feel more fulfilled, usually, and I say usually, I mean, I don't have the data, but I would say anecdotally that the preponderance of challenges that people that are trying to alter the trajectory of their life face comes down to a lack of trust in themselves. Because all the other factors will put in place, and they just still stop themselves short.
It's trusting themselves and also the process. I mean, I play tennis every morning. That's one of my sort of like routines. And I've been playing now for 30 something years. And I just had a revelation the other week, like, because I play with the kids, I play with hitters from the WashU team in St. Louis. And like, they're just amazing players. They're D1 athletes. They're absolutely spectacular. And I'm always wondering, like, what the difference is. There's like a slight difference where I feel like they trust their shots a little more than me when it gets close. And I suddenly had the thought of that's it, right? Which is they know and they commit to themselves and they trust it. And it's the difference between that slight bit of tension in your arm or your legs when you don't 100% trust yourself. And it isn't just conscious, it's unconscious. So you can't just be like, I trust myself, and tell yourself that consciously. It has to develop as an unconscious, as deep as possible. And that only comes from experience. And so, that's one of the things I'm working on the tennis court, hoping it fits into the rest of my life, is just trusting it, committing to it, which are basically the same thing. So you just commit to the action knowing that you don't need tension, because the tension is what derails you.
Are you familiar with the 4 stages of competence, or they call it the competence hierarchy? So it's, I don't know who came up with it, but it's it's an arc of learning that we start with unconscious incompetence. We don't know that we're not even good at a thing. Yes. Then we become conscious of our incompetence. Mm-hmm. And then we become consciously competent as we develop a skill at the thing. And we keep doing it long enough that we move into unconscious competence. We're not even having to think about it.
And it shows up because, like, on the days, there was a day where I didn't get any sleep because there was a stressful work situation going on. I showed up on the court, was only thinking about this work thing, and absolutely played lights out, lights out. And I was just
you probably played better.
Oh,
you're less conscious.
Lights out. And I was just like, what in the world? And then I was like, oh, it's because my conscious brain wasn't tense and wasn't interrupting the flow. So, Tiger Woods, they say, used to hypnotize himself to play to some degree. And that's what his dad kind of trained him. And I totally get it. It's like you have to go into a flow state, but it has to be kind of unconsciously summoned.
So the one other thing that I want to sort of, I guess, call it a plug for the audience, although you're welcome to partake as well. I've loved the way this conversation has gravitated towards this sort of notion of trusting the process, trusting your instinct, trusting yourself enough to believe that something that is authentic self-expression has intrinsic merit and can develop into something worthy in the world, and without trying to control and constrain the process or destroy it by comparison to others. There's another episode of this podcast with an AI researcher named Ken Stanley. And the basic thesis that we arrived at was his statement is that greatness cannot be planned. Mm. And his work in AI is around what he calls non-object orientation artificial intelligence. So he essentially removes all sense of objective from AI processes and then just lets them run free and kind of sees what happens. And he's brilliant, and he's awarded, and he's innovative, and he's got patents, and he's come up with all these amazing things because he removed the object orientation of the AI process. And I think that applies to us too. So if anybody's been really intrigued by this conversation and kind of wants to follow that thread in another context, look up the interview I did with Ken Stanley. But again, the artist in me has just loved that's kind of what we've landed on, because I think it's so true. And I think it's so important for people to hear that are trying to change the orientation of their lives.
Absolutely. I mean, I think it is that you have to be able to play. And I think so much of art can't be planned. And it is just about, like I said, like that year where I just walked around until something happened. It's just, I think it's the same. Sometimes you just show up at your computer and something happened,
Which means the thing that a lot of us can do, because it can be terrifying to say, I want things to change, therefore what? You're saying don't try to do anything? No, the thing we can do is create space in our life.
Yeah. It's just showing up, creating space, creating the structures that let you, take you out of your routines and just give yourself a little room for an idea to come,
Where can the world go if they want to get more from you, or maybe know about your books, or even know what you're up to now?
My website is Soman Chainani, SomanChainani.com. And then I have a Substack, somanchainani.substack.com. And my Instagram is SomanZ. And between those three, everything's all in there.
Incredible. Well, thank you so much. I've really, really deeply enjoyed this conversation.
My pleasure. Thank you so much for having me.
Of course. And to all you viewers and listeners out there, you are the best part of the show, why we do it every time. Can't wait to see you next time. Take care.
If you loved that episode, then you're definitely going to love this one. Check it out.
People were not congratulating my parents. in the mid-90s for having an entrepreneurial daughter. They were like, Tina's so smart. She could have been a doctor. She could have been a lawyer. She's wasting her potential not doing something a lot safer.